Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, here are the Apple numbers. Third quarter revenue coming in above estimates at $85.78 billion. Estimates were for $84.46 billion. Third quarter iPhone revenue coming in above estimates at $39.3 billion. Estimates were for $38.95 billion. Third quarter Greater China revenue coming in below estimates. That one certainly watched very closely, $14.73 billion. But we did see third quarter services revenue come in above estimates at $24.21 billion. Shares of Apple bouncing around in the after hours. They were at first higher when these numbers first crossed, now down about 1%.
Yeah, they are bouncing, kind of flat, if you will, right? They're bouncing around here, so we're trying to make sense of it. So let's get to it with our co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg Television, Ed Ludlow, here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Big week, big day. Ed, first blush, what are you taking away from these Apple
I kind
numbers?
of alluded to this in the preview in the Top Live blog. Great beat for iPhone revenue in the quarter, which is interesting because we're pre-16.
Yeah, like why are people buying phones right now? They should be waiting, right?
And there was a lot of evidence in markets like China that they were buying the 15 generation with the intention of holding on to it. And then I go to the Greater China revenue missing estimates. And the third-party data is not always right. But it did tell us that Apple was slipping in Greater China.
This is the IDC data?
The IDC data.
Okay.
There's Counterpoint Research. There's loads. But my point is that there was worry they did really face domestic pressure on the handset market there. And you always look to China as a point of focus. So you have to read between the lines because on the earnings call, CFO Luca Maestri often addresses that issue head on, how they did in the market in China specifically.
Earnings per share coming in $1.40 per share. That beat estimates of $1.35. So a beat there as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at kind of our right-through buyer, Mark Gurman, marking a return to revenue growth last quarter, he says, topping analyst estimates, indicating that upgraded iPads and a strong services business helped make up for some of those headwinds in China. So sales were up 5% to $85.8 billion in that fiscal third quarter. The iPhone maker putting out that statement, analysts had predicted 84.5, so that's a beat. 3 months ago, the CFO had said the company would grow by a percentage in the low single digits during the period. So some comparisons there. Again, just quick check on what Apple's doing here in the aftermarket, pulling it up here on my Bloomberg, because we said it's been bouncing around here. It's now up about 2% here in the aftermarket. Keep in mind, Apple's up about 13% so far in 2024.
Okay, overall revenue beat, iPhone revenue beat, Mac revenue beat, iPad revenue beat, wearables, homes, and accessories also beat. So looking pretty good. There was that miss on China, of course. Tim Cook saying in a statement that Apple is reporting a new June quarter revenue record of $85.8 billion, up 5% from a year ago. Talking about announcing software platforms at WWDC, Apple Intelligence. Ed, Apple Intelligence, what's the question that investors are going to be looking to the answer for on the call today?
It's actually important to us what investors are looking for. A lot of people looked at what Apple Intelligence was and said, actually, it's fantastic. Yeah. They understand the logic that what Apple wants to do is make the things already on iOS better. That's based on the conversations I've had with investors. The thing is that they'd already accepted to a large extent, because it's priced into the stock, that it's not ready for the prime time. It's not like here. And so I do think that it's going to be interesting to get some very specific detail from the call on geographic rollout, generation of iPhone rollout. Mark Gurman has reported on all of this, right? The delay by a few weeks post iOS 18 generation software update. But that's what investors are looking at. They're trying to do the math on what prompts an individual to buy a new iPhone or up their subscription to Apple services, because how compelling that product is. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we said, I'm going to buy a new phone. I know Paul Sweeney's going to buy a new phone. I know I look at the end of the year, all the money that goes out to Apple and all the various services and cloud storage and so on and so forth.
I hear the CFO taking notes right now, Carol. 2 new phones will be sold in the fourth quarter or third quarter of the year.
Now, it's kind of interesting, right? Exactly. And, I'm looking at our live blog, too. There isn't a single mention of the Vision Pro in Apple's earnings release. The $3,500 headset is Apple's first major new product in nearly a decade. There's not a ton left in the cupboard in terms of innovation, with the company canceling its self-driving car in February. That's coming from our Mark Gurman.
What's interesting is that there's a post from Ed Ludlow in the live blog. How did he do that while he's here in our studio with us?
Yeah, I mean, the fingers move faster than the mouth sometimes, guys.
How are you thinking about, we've been talking with you throughout the week about the tech reporting season and the big mega cap tech companies that have reported. How are you thinking about them? I don't know that there's one trend line to
There is a trend
through.
line excluding Apple, which is capital expenditures. And what's so interesting is, like, I was talking a bit about this in the blog earlier. Apple's capex is always low. A lot of investors always bemoaned its cash balance. It's so ginormous.
Right.
I look at the release and I see Apple's board of directors declares a cash dividend of 25 cents per share. There's one really important thing when you cover a stock like this. You need to remind yourself, how widely held is the stock around the world? Mm-hmm. Yes, there are many institutional investors that hold it in volume. One of them was on my show today, Denny Fish of Janus. Think of all the individuals that buy Apple stock because they think it's prestigious. I always find that fascinating. So a little divvy goes a long way.
It does. It does go a long way. Hey, listen, we've been reading his comments along with Ed's on the blog. We read his story on Apple. Let's bring him in. Mark Gurman is Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent. We call him our Apple guru, joining us right now, coming off of earnings. Mark, walk us through what you think the Bloomberg audience needs to know about this release.
Yeah, the through line here is that Apple beat across the board in every product category: iPhone, iPad, wearables, home and accessories, Mac, and services. So nice beats across the board there. Still, the iPhone, 1% year-over-year decline. Not terrible, especially given that we are going into the new iPhone season. The other thing to note, though, is Greater China. Greater China is down about 6%. This came in both below expectations and obviously is an annual decline. That's something that I think a lot of analysts and investors are going to want to take a look at. Why is China's performance continuing to decline? Apple does say, though, that they still see this as an improvement over the China situation in the first half of the year, but still this is not great. Looking ahead, we're going to want to know any color that Apple may have on its call about how they're thinking they're going to do in the current quarter, the fourth quarter. The new iPhone line, the 16, will go on sale towards the very end of Q4, towards the end of September. So that's going to be a significant moment, obviously contribute quite significantly to the bottom line in the current period, which obviously we're looking ahead at that. Another thing I want to call out is the iPad. The iPad grew 24%.
Wow.
Not entirely a surprise. I'm surprised that Wall Street estimated so low on the iPad. Let's not forget that Apple hadn't released a new version of the iPad for about a year and a half, and then released two major versions of the new iPad in May, along with major updates to their accessories. So no surprise there.
Mark, they're not giving guidance anymore for the current quarter, but what do you expect them in terms of color to give about how sales are going to be in the current quarter? And then, obviously they're not going to talk about new iPhones that haven't been announced yet, but what kind of tidbits could we get?
Well, it's anyone's guess what they're going to say. I'm not going to speculate. It really can go, one way or another. They're probably going to give some sort of indicator of how the iPhone is going to do in the fourth quarter. And there's really three options. They're going to say, let me take a step back. There's really two options of what they're going to say on this call. They're either going to say that the iPhone performance for Q4 is going to be in line with iPhone performance in Q4 last year, or they're going to say iPhone performance will accelerate in Q4 in comparison to last year. If they don't say either of those things, I think it's a pretty good indicator that they think it's probably going to decline a little bit, or they're not entirely sure. They're probably not going to come out and say that in the iPhone launch quarter, the iPhone is going to do more poorly than it did last year.
Hey, Mark, it's unbelievable that you and I are speaking on Bloomberg Radio and simultaneously blogging live on the Bloomberg terminal. There are going to be terminal subscribers around the world that just don't understand what's happening. One thing I'd love to do with you, and I know it's hard, is the math on China. You get that 3Q iPhone beat and then the weakness in Greater China. Is it likely to be product specific in terms of iPhone, or where does Apple tend to point us when they have a specific geographic weakness?
Well, the thing is Apple never really gets into geographic weakness on a product-by-product basis. What they have said over the past several quarters, as people have asked about the declines in China, is that these declines are not due to the iPhone. Now, they're not saying what those other products are that are contributing to the declines, whether it's the iPad, whether it's the Mac, whether it's wearables. They're not sharing that information. So who knows what they're going to tell us this time. I believe personally that it does have to do with the iPhone and some of the softness we're seeing there. A lot of people are buying Huawei, Vivo, Oppo, the local phone makers, instead of the iPhone at this point. So I would say this has to do with the iPhone this quarter. Whether or not Apple's going to come out and say that, that's another story.
We're talking with Mark Gurman. We're talking with Ed Ludlow. Apple third quarter iPhone revenue, that's a beat. Third quarter Greater China revenue, that was a miss. Third quarter revenue overall, that was a beat. Mark, in terms of AI and Apple Intelligence, which they showed off a lot at the developers conference in June, what would be a question that you'd want to know about that? I know they're still developing, they're working on it, but what do you want to know?
I want to know if they think it's going to drive sales, because I can tell you after using it for the past few days or so, I don't think there's any reason why anyone should buy a new iPhone based solely on the new features that are currently available or will be available from Apple Intelligence at the get-go. I happen to think that Apple Intelligence is really a late 2025 story, and maybe next year is when that's going to drive sales. But the current incarnation, it shouldn't be a sales driver, quite frankly, based on their marketing and some ridiculous comments I've seen from Wall Street analysts and others who cover Apple. Maybe they'll still grow based on it. Some people will be disappointed if they buy the iPhone based on Apple Intelligence, at least from the beginning.
Ed, come on back in here to remind us about CapEx and why CapEx should be looked at differently with Apple than with that Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, and Meta.
Just because historically capital expenditures for Apple are just kind of a non-event. They're not at the 10 percentage point to 20 percentage point range that the hyperscalers have, particularly in the current environment, right? It's just not a part of their story. And Mark can always correct me if I'm wrong, but what I find so interesting about Apple's strategy is the cost of where they're trying to get to, which is Apple Intelligence. Think about the partnerships, right? You know, Apple is not as hyper-focused on the building of its own large language model. It has some activity there, but it partners with OpenAI.
Yeah.
So OpenAI takes the R&D costs. How does Apple facilitate its cloud? It relies on GCP, Google Cloud Platform, you know, and Google does its own R&D investment on the silicon side. And I find that so interesting. And, you know, that's why I'm you guys know I'm like tongue in cheek, but it's why I post in the blog about the divvy and about cash generation and the growing balance sheet, because investors always say, I wonder what they'll do with that one day. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, listen, they say during the quarter, our record business performance generated EPS growth of 11%, nearly $29 billion in operating cash flow, allowing us to return over $32 billion to shareholders. I mean, I always think about this, Mark, whenever we talk with you and whenever we talk with Ed. I mean, just the law of large numbers when it comes to Apple specifically. As you continue to look at this report and release, I don't know, what should we leave our investors with? What do you think that they should be thinking top of mind when it comes to Apple?
I'll simplify it for you. From a financial standpoint, everything is just fine, right? A little bit of concern in China, but my concerns about Apple aren't the financials today. It's that this company is not pushing out products at the pace that they used to. I'm simply not seeing that game-changing innovation that we used to see. I'm simply not seeing them leapfrog ahead of the competition. I'm seeing a lot of response to the competition, like with Apple Intelligence. I'm seeing something that's not as good as the competition with Apple Intelligence. I'm seeing them add features to iOS that Android has had for a number of years. I'm seeing really impressive new technology like the Vision Pro that's not a product. It's more of a prototype or a developer kit.
Yeah.
So I'm concerned about Apple products right now, and obviously products, hardware drives this company.
Yeah, so long term, Mark, because you have such a good view into the pipeline, much to the chagrin of Apple, I imagine, no car coming. Vision Pro, as you mentioned in the live blog, not even mentioned in this report. Is that right?
That's right.
So what is the big picture for the pipeline over the next 5 years?
I think we're probably 2 or 3 years away from a bigger new product push, whether that's augmented reality glasses, foldable phones, new types of touch screen devices, new home devices, new Macs. But I'm not seeing anything in the next 2 to 3 years that is going to be a game changer, right? The Vision Pro technology is a game changer. Nobody wants it. It's too heavy. It's too expensive. There's no content.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Listen, you're a gem. You have so much going on and so appreciate it. Mark Gurman, he's Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent, joining us out there from the West Coast. We're not going to let Ed Ludlow go yet because, Ed, we lean on you like we lean on Mark. I feel like we've been going through a lot of the tech news.
That's why we flew him out to New York this week.
on the Bloomberg jet. The good and the bad of the big tech that have been reporting?
Yeah, that's a really, really smart question. So there's one thing that I learned very quickly, which was Microsoft, do not miss Wall Street estimates. That won't go well for you. And I think that it's because we've joked about the money machine, but now the investors are really starting to do the math on it. You know, the CapEx number was everything. I think I even heard Ian King on the phone to you just say capital expenditures and then hang up. And it's because with that, you can basically do the math on the timing of sales growth and bottom line growth from artificial intelligence, and then you can sort of extrapolate it out further afield. That's why Amazon's so interesting. Until the call, we're not really going to know if it's a CapEx issue for AI or if their retail business wasn't very good.
It's a really great point.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you need to know these details.
Amazon in the after hours now, as we do wait for details from that call, down 5.7%.
I'm like, do we want to let him go? I guess we need to.
Yeah, we got to let him go because we got another interview to do.
What?
I just got a data point. So on the CFO call, there's a media call that's just started with Amazon. Amazon spent $35 billion on capital expenditures in the first half of 2024. Wow. So we don't have a number for the quarter, but it was $35 billion in 1H, and it will be more than that in 2H, which is largely due to investments in AWS infrastructure. So I think I answered that question.
You did answer it. Asked and answered. All right, kiddo. Listen, thank you so much. So great to have him here on the East Coast this week. The co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV. Catch him 11 a.m. Wall Street time, Monday through Friday on Bloomberg Television. Of course, the one and only Ed Ludlow.